And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, for Tuesday morning, IFR to start the day out up there for the North Slope out to the Arctic coast. A couple of bands of IFR here out over the Bering Sea, also up through the Bering Strait from St. Lawrence Island. And pretty good VFR here west and north of the Alaska Range into the interior. And then marginal VFR right along the Alaska Range. VFR Cook Inlet, most of the Susitna Valley. And some IFR here for western Prince William Sound into the southeast Copper River Basin. Actually over the mountainous terrain here down into the northern Panhandle. And for the afternoon, becoming mostly VFR here for the southeast coast with some lingering marginal VFR down to the south, Prince of Wales Island, eastward there to the border, and then northward across Petersburg and Wrangell. And again, the Alaska Range southward areas of marginal VFR with some VFR thrown in. And then to the north and west of the mountains here, all the way up to the Arctic coast now, VFR. Bering Sea still hanging on to good IFR there from the Bering Strait southward here across St. Lawrence Island to the Pribilofs, just along the west side of Nunivak Island, extending down to the Alaska Peninsula eastern Aleutians. And for Wednesday morning, IFR right along the central eastern Arctic coast. Otherwise, VFR from the North Slope into the Brooks Range, all the way down to the interior here with some marginal VFR along and south of the Alaska Range again. Areas of VFR as well. VFR for Bristol Bay, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. But along the coast, marginal VFR. And actually IFR along the Yukon Delta coast there to Nunivak Island. And again, northward through the Bering Strait, trying to press in toward the northwest coast. And now IFR covering a good portion of the Bering Sea down into the central Aleutians. IFR northern and eastern southeast coast. For the afternoon, marginal VFR for the Panhandle, Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and up across the Talkeetnas and portions of the Alaska Range. Looks like VFR, central southern Susitna Valley, or actually most of the Susitna Valley, down across Cook Inlet and the western Kenai Peninsula into northern Bristol Bay here, marginal VFR on the east side of Kodiak Island. But you can see VFR all the way up off the Arctic coast, Bering Sea, northern Bering Sea here, IFR right on up through the Bering Strait, and again, right just off the northwest coast there. And then for the southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, marginal VFR with areas of IFR. And for the passes tomorrow, Anaktuvik and Adigan, both looking good with VFR flying in both those passes. And Lake Clark and Merrill, not as good as the Brooks Range. For the Alaska Range, marginal VFR all the way around, rainy, windy, Isabel and Mentasta. And Tanita, marginal VFR, especially on the eastern entrance. Portage, marginal. Chilkoot and White, though, VFR. And for the freezing levels, 10,000 feet up there, right along the central Arctic coast, and about 8,000 feet through the interior, cooling to about 4,000 to 6,000 feet here across the Kenai Peninsula, Bristol Bay, and in across the Panhandle. And then warmer conditions, 8,000 to 10,000 feet over the central and western Aleutians. Not looking for any significant icing out over the Bering Sea, the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. About the most significant icing will occur here down over the southern southeast coast, possible considerable moderate rime icing there. And isolated moderate possible here from the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country southwestward into the Kuskokwim Valley and along the western Alaska Range. And we're looking at continued easterly flow here at 33,000 feet across southern Alaska. In fact, actually most of Alaska all the way up to the Arctic coast, looking at generally light easterly flow, turning northeast at about 65 knots for the Alaska Peninsula there. The stronger jet well down to the south there and across Vancouver Island. Northerlies at about 75 over the central Bering Sea to the Aleutians. 9,000 feet, weak low up here just south of the Russian coast, so some westerlies up to 35 knots there. That's staying well out to the west. Northeast to north winds here, blowing out of Bristol Bay at about 30 knots down across on Alaska Island, western Alaska Peninsula. A little breezy just skirting the Arctic coast there, only 20 to 25 knots though, light and variable over the interior, all the way down in the Gulf, as well as the Panhandle. And for the 3,000 foot winds, basically weak high pressure here over south central Alaska, roughly in this area. And we've got easterly winds 20 to 30 knots along the Arctic coast, also along the northwest coast there. And not too bad for the panhandle, stronger winds down to the south, and then a narrow band of light northerly winds, and that's about it out over the Bering Sea there down to the eastern Aleutians here. Picks up to about 30 knots there, so throw in some isolated moderate turbulence possible here, especially for smaller aircraft, for Nikolsky on Alaska, Dutch Harbor, those areas. And also up here along the western and central Arctic coast down to about Kivalina. Could be a little bumpy up in that area too. Otherwise, no significant turbulence expected anywhere else around the state.